Today's guest wrote the book many refer to as the Bible for steelhead fishing. He was the guy who created and perfected the snap T-cast, and he's one of the most respected anglers in the steelhead game. And today, he's going to break down the history and some of the best tips for steelhead and spey so you have a better shot at hooking these magical steelhead while on the river this season. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone out there. Deck Hogan, Passion for Steelhead author, steelhead guide, and expert spey casting instructor, is here to take us back into history books of how Northwest Spey began and how steelhead fishing with the spey rod took off. We're going to talk about how to slow down your fly for more success today. You understand where the fish are holding and how to present the fly to these fish. And you're going to find out what happens if you get a pluck, a touch, and you're going to understand what the fish are actually doing under the water. You're always out there and you feel sometimes a little bit of feedback, but what is that fish actually doing, and how do you get that fish to come back to your fly? It's all on today. Plus, you're going to hear about the crew that created the first Skagit lines. Deck was there when they were cutting these things up for single-handed rods. He tells a story there and how this all kicked off the spey revolution. Spey Nation, everything we have going. So it doesn't get any better than our guest today. Let's find out how it all came together. Here he is, Deck Hogan. How you doing, Deck?
Awesome. Great to be back, Dave.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put a link in the show notes to the episode you did in 2018, quite a while ago, but we talked about a number of interesting topics, including your book, Passion for Steelhead, and some other things you had going. But today we're going to really focus on steelhead and spey, because I think that's what you're known for, obviously. We're going to dig into that. But before we get there, take us back real quick on your fly fishing, kind of how you got started and what's your first memory there.
Yeah, so the real quick answer isn't really quick, but
Yeah.
It all started when I was born.
Yeah.
I think I just was born to love the outdoors and nature and fishing. And my parents, when I was, I think about 5 years old, they went through the divorce thing, and we ended up with my father in this little tiny town in Northern California in the coastal mountains, and literally 5-6 years old. And my dad's taking me out fishing all the time. On these cool little bass ponds that were just loaded with fish, and he got permission to fish them, I guess. I didn't realize it at the time, but I just thought my dad was, absolutely in love with fishing. And what the reality is he does love fishing, but we were fishing for food. Yeah, it was some couple tough years there for my good old dad. And, but for me, it was a blast, because we did spend tons of time in the outdoors, and he carried his 22 around and shot a rabbit now and then or whatever he could, and we ate everything. So we fished a ton, and I just thoroughly fell in love with it at that point, and then just stayed obsessed with fishing for the remainder of, till today. And along the way, with getting back to live with my mom and back and forth, and her finding a career, we were all over California. Like, I literally went to 5 different elementary schools in 6 years. In that time, I always found a place to fish. It was kind of my solace through all of this. And I didn't realize that either. I just thought I liked to fish, but it was something I needed mentally and emotionally, I think, looking back at it. But yeah, golf courses, sneaking in at night, fishing the water traps, Boy Scouts in the high Sierras, fishing all over, and those high mountain lakes and streams, and on and on. And then I started fly fishing because it happened to be in the Boy Scouts. In the evening, on a couple occasions, my little Panther Martin spinner wasn't working, and there was fish rising everywhere, all over. And I used to slay them on that little Panther Martin bumblebee pattern spinner. And I'd catch the occasional fish during those, now we know were midge hatches. And I came home, and from one of those trips, I think I was 12 or 13, and I told my mom, I said, I need a fly rod. So I realized that I got to be fishing these little flies. And she got me a little outfit, and I just taught myself and went back up there, and it actually worked. And I started catching fish again. And then I would use the fly whenever it was what I felt was going to be the greatest chances of hooking fish. So I was back and forth between spin gear, fly gear. And then I went in the Navy, and landed up in Washington, at Whidbey Island, Washington, Naval Air Station. And by that time, I had an obsession with fly fishing and made the transition to pretty much 100% fly rod. And so I was 21 when I 21, 22 when I really committed to the fly. And of course, I was in steelhead country and knew about steelhead since I was a little kid, and just always mystified by them. Had no idea how to do it or where to do it. And my dad didn't know anything about it, so we never did it. And then, of course, landing at Whidbey Island, Washington, right near the mouth of the Skagit River, Skykomish, Stillaguamish, all those S rivers, and then found my way into it and didn't look back. I can tell you more, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And that's where we'll pick up. We've heard some of this on, I think, the first episode we did with your connection. But yeah, it's pretty cool because, I mean, you started kind of your whole, I love the story of your dad, supporting you, because it's pretty cool to think, like, in this day and age with the way where we are with everything, right? It's like you experience like having to, basically catch your food.
Oh yeah,
right. Not a lot of people can say. I mean, I think there's people around the world that are still doing that, right? But you did it. I mean, how did that feel to, like, you're a kid, you didn't even really notice. At some point, did you notice? Did you? Yeah. Thanks for
circling back to that, because all of a sudden we weren't fishing as much with Dad. And he did love it. Don't get me wrong. My dad loved fishing till the day he died. But we stopped fishing as much. And then now I'm going, hey, Dad, why aren't we going fishing? Let's go fishing. Aren't we going to go fishing? And it was harder then because he got a good job and was making more money now. Now we could go to the grocery store and buy some things. And it was not as, wasn't as important. Well, really important. You got to feed our faces.
Right.
So, yeah. But then we continued to fish together off and on for forever. But yeah, those days where we were fishing every single day were gone once he got on his feet.
That's it. Nice. So taking it back, so the steelhead, you're up in Washington. Take us back there. What was that? What were the early days of, like, the Skagit, the S's, all the rivers where you kind of started to really get into it? Because eventually you were kind of at the highest level with all the people a lot of us know about or have heard about. But what was it like early on there for steelhead?
Yeah, it was fabulous. And like anything, when you're in it, it's just what you know, it's what you do. I didn't realize that I did and I didn't, that I was on this unbelievable time. And again, the people that I was around, the Harry Lemire's, Bob Strobel, Harry Winnels, and even not Ralph Wall, he was still alive. But all that who's who of, kind of pioneering the sport, he's still around.
What year was that when you're meeting Harry Lemire and some of these other people?
I think we started in late 1980s. And then by 1990 is when I was like, chest deep in it, and it was full throttle.
Yeah.
100% obsession, fishing around those guys. And at that time, there wasn't a ton of people. Of course, there really wasn't social media then, so word of mouth and the occasional magazine articles, how you learned about things. And it was a couple big handfuls of people up there. And fishing was, it was phenomenal. By today's standards, it's still steelhead fishing, still hard, still difficult, but they were there pretty much. If you always say that when you went out for the day, if you didn't get one during the day, you were wondering why.
Right.
Meaning that, every piece of water that I got in my heart was just pounding in my throat because I was probably going to get something.
Yep.
And that's not just on the Skagit. That was on all those rivers.
That was
all
everything.
Those rivers that we fished up there. Yeah. And when you'd go out on a day, you know how today, if you go out and you get lucky and you get a fish or two and you go, gosh, I wonder how everybody else is doing and how fortunate am I to have caught one? And you go ask your buddy, no, nothing. And you realize that, yeah, you found the needle in the haystack. You were lucky. But back then, if I went out and caught 1, 2, or 3 fish in the day, I didn't wonder how my buddies were doing. I knew how they were doing. We would meet at the end of the day and everybody caught fish.
Right.
For the most part. Yep.
Right.
So that's kind of the difference. Yep.
That was the difference. Yeah. What was in those late 80s, 90s, did you go right into single or right into like Spey, or were you starting off a single hand for steelhead?
No, I started off before the big ignition of the two-handed thing, just right on the edge of it. So we had single-handed rods, and most people did, and then we saw a couple of people that did have the two-handers, namely that Harry Lemire, Bob Strobel, and even Pete Sovrel. We saw him with them. And I remember the first two-hander I cast was I was hanging out with Ed Ward and Scott O'Donnell in those days. But Ed, well, we were constant companions, the three amigos out there every day learning and figuring it out for ourselves. And Ed actually bought a Orvis 13-foot, I don't know, 8 or 9 weight two-hander through mail order. And we got that in our hands. That was the first one I cast. And, when you're out there waiting for steelhead and you're casting, I always say that the closer your fly is to the fish, the slower it's going to go, and slow is good, right? So we wade out to our chest in that big Skagit River. We cast our single-handed rods as far as we can. We put a big giant mend in it and just, get the line up behind it to get a good slow swing, as slow as you can. And you're reaching out there and just trying to slow that fly. You're not trying to be a macho steelheader. We're just trying to slow the fly. The closer you are to the fish, the slower it's going to go. So, and people say the fish are in close to shore. Well, they are, because that's where the rocks are and the slower waters. But that's all relative, right? If it's a big, huge river, it's they're, they can be out there pretty far still. So put that two-handed rod in my hands and make just an overhead cast, and it was just, the clouds parted and the angels sang. I just couldn't believe how slow my fly was swinging way out there.
Right.
Just with the length of the rod, went from a 9.5 foot rod to 13 or 13.5 foot rod. That's a lot to slow that fly. So the reason I even bring this up and talk about it, and I still get goosebumps when I think about it, is that me and my buds, our transition back then to the two-hander wasn't about the sexy cast and the no back cast room. It was all about slowing the fly. That's what that long rod really is wonderful, for. So, and then of course we learned how to cast it and whatnot. And I always joke that even though that long rod, we're slowing the fly out there, then I'm still wading out there and casting as far as I can and trying to hold it out there. Yeah. And then you start getting takes way out there.
Right.
Because you are slowing the fly out there. Oh my gosh. It's just wonderful. Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. First of all, why does the longer rod slow the fly down more? And then talk about how you would slow that fly if you're fishing it.
So what I alluded to earlier is that in my world and the physics I look at is that the closer that rod tip is to the fly, the slower it's going to go, right? The less line on the water. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hence the reason we're wading deep and sticking our arm way out there.
Right. So at times you could raise your rod even higher off the water and get even more control. And
absolutely. For that. Yeah. So that's basically it. And if you think about that, when you think about where you get your takes in steelhead, that fly is swinging, or in most fish when you swing, but we're talking about steelhead. The place most of us get our takes are, I'm not even going out on a limb. It's true. We get most of our takes in that middle third, right?
That's true.
You've caught them before, right? In that middle third. Yep. And just into the end of the middle third.
Yeah.
And I ask my students and my fellow anglers and myself, do you think that fish took because that's where it was in that part of the swing? You just happened to come over the top of it in the middle part of the swing? I don't. What I think is, it's sure, sometimes it is, but I believe that that's where the fly is swinging the best, because that's, they like a certain speed, and that's where that rod tip, if you're following along, makes that fly, and the coupled with the position and the angle and the current, that's where it's swimming the best. That's where it's looking most seductive and vulnerable to the steelhead, and that's when they take it. So when I and you and anybody can get a longer rod and get a slower swing, that same sexy swing speed way out there, you can get them out there as well.
That's awesome. I was just on the Deschutes, and I know you know that river well. I was fishing. I haven't fished it much in the last few years, but I went out there and with my family, and I went out to a run that I knew really well. And for me, it was a long cast, but I knew the spot. It was kind of like, just like you said, it was the middle of the run. There was this little bucket, probably a little section that I've hooked tons of fish, and I went through, and as it swung through, I felt the same. It was so subtle. It was just like barely a bump, and I knew it was a steelhead.
Yep.
And so I didn't move, put the same cast back on it, swung the same cast, and the thing did the same. You bump, and just slowly started dragging it along, and and then finally it hooked up, but it was barely moved, and I was like, oh my God, is this a bass? For a minute, you're like, what is this? And it slowly, and it didn't really fight at all. And I pulled it in, and well, I mean, I eventually got it. It gave me, once it got going, it did fight a little bit, but at the start, it was a very subtle thing. I pulled it in, it was a hatchery fish, not a giant fish. It was a hatchery steelhead, bonked it and had some food for the table.
Yeah.
But talk about that a little bit on the takes. Like, have you, I mean, I know you've seen everything. Yeah. Describe that a little bit.
When you're telling that story, the little cloud over my head was going out. It's hatchery fish.
Yeah. Oh, really? There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
It's hatchery fish.
Yep.
And I've seen those fish since I've watched a lot of fish standing above on the chutes. And when you get that little tiny, that little tiny grain of sand bump 99 times out of 100, a lot of times it's a little hatchery buck. I don't know if yours was.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
They come straight up at it, and they come right behind it, and they just take a little tiny nip.
Right.
There's no turn. There's no speed to it.
No.
They just a little nip. Yep.
Yeah. So why is that? Why is that such a big deal? You'd think, that fish went out to the ocean, all this stuff. What's your take on how that fish, why does it do that?
I would love to have a solid answer for that. They're hatchery fish. They're not as engineered to be as aggressive. Who really knows? I do know sometimes though, that you can also get a hatchery fish, the same fish on a different day that just turns on it and attacks it. Right.
Right.
So that's fish's reaction to that fly. Because I've also seen wild fish come up. They do it a little quicker.
Yeah.
They'll come up and then turn away really fast, or they'll make an attempt at it like 3 inches behind the fly, thinking it's going to get sucked in, and they miss it too. Or they just come up, look at it, and drop back down very subtly. So that's their reaction. For whatever reason, gosh, I wish I could tell you. We can all say, the hatchery fish are dumbed down and they're not as Who
knows?
Who knows? But more often than not, that fish is the one that does what your fish did. A wild fish, if he keeps coming a little more aggressive. I can tell you that it's cool that you hooked that fish.
Yeah, I know. I think a lot of people, if they didn't have experience, they'd have no idea, wouldn't even know.
Right. And I've had that time where I'm watching that fish and it comes up, and I'm like, oh, I can read their language. It comes up behind my guy's fly, takes that little nip, goes back down. I go, did you feel anything? The guy goes, nope.
Right.
I go, just put one in there, put another one in there. And I goes, why? I go, I fib. I say, I don't know. I think I might have saw something. I'm not sure. And because I don't want us to dwell on it.
Yeah.
I said, put it in there again. Sometimes that fish will come up. This time he's a foot behind it. And I know the game with this guy, and we just move on. Look for another one.
Right.
Yeah.
Dreaming of battling a giant rainbow trout in Alaska's untouched rivers? Turn that dream into a reality with FishHound Expeditions. Immerse yourself in the heart of Alaska, where epic landscapes and legendary fish await. Visit fishhoundexpeditions.com and mention this podcast to begin your adventure. FishHound Expeditions, your gateway to the ultimate Alaskan fishing experience. Drifthook is your trusted source for high-quality flies that level up your fly fishing experience. I use and love Drifthook's hand-selected flies, and they offer a money-back guarantee for any reason if you're not satisfied. You can order today right now at drifthook.com and use the code SWING at checkout for 15% off your next order. That's Drifthook, DRIFTHOOK.com. Check it out now. Let's go back to the history books here a little bit on that. So you're in the middle of all this, the Skagit. What were the rivers you were fishing? Talk about that, your guide. I mean, you guided and you did all this. What were the big rivers besides the S rivers? What else were you covering?
So the S rivers are a big part of it. So I got my first steelhead on the fly on the North Fork Stillaguamish. I got my first bunch of fish there, and then I found the Skagit and caught them on the Skagit, and then the Skykomish. But then as far as my guiding, my first real guiding was in Alaska. And my goal for Alaska was to start filling the gap and start living that dream of being a full-time guide. But I went up there hoping to hone my fishing skills, and which there's a lot of opportunity, and guiding skills, and to recruit steelhead clientele. And the timing of it was fantastic, and it all started working. So my first days of guiding steelhead on a regular basis was on the Skagit. I did my first time ever guiding, though, was on the Stillaguamish, and that was a one-day kind of thing. But I kicked it off on the Skagit. And then after the Skagit, I'd go back to did the catch and release season on the Skagit, and then March, April, and then went to Alaska, came back, and I got hooked up with Little Creek Outfitters, which is different owners than Marty and Mia now. It was John Eklund.
Yep.
And on that little lodge and on the Grand Ronde. And man, I landed there to fish the fall, and I was blown away. I remember back then talking to John as he was kind of interviewing me over the phone to get the job. They were looking for a guide, and George Cook kind of turned him on to me and turned me on to them. And I said, so what, what's a good day on the Grand Ronde? He goes, oh, I don't know. You can have 10 fish days. And I'm like, what?
Right.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, I was realistic. I know that I'm not going to go out there and have my guys or myself catch 10 fish a day all the time. But went out there, and you bet that first year I was there, we were hooking 1 to 10 fish a day quite frequently back then. So, and again, a place to learn, and I guess I was sharp enough to and astute enough to anytime I had these opportunities where there was a lot of fish around, that's when I would experiment and try all kinds of different methods and how long to wait for a fish to take. And because there wasn't huge sacrifice. If you missed it or it didn't work, there was always another one waiting. So those were some really neat years. Then after that, I switched over to John Hazel gave me a call and said, hey, man, I've got a ton of work for if you want it on the Deschutes. And it was a better opportunity for guide days. So I went over to the Deschutes. And then getting back to the winter stuff, the Skagit closed one year. So I took my operation down to the Skykomish in the wintertime, fell in love with the Skykomish, learned a whole bunch about it. Fishing was fabulous. So my main guiding rivers for steelhead, to really get down and answer your question, was the Skagit, Skykomish, Deschutes, and Grand Ronde. Those were my 4 babies that I guided, and I've poked around on other rivers and special trips for special people, but that was my bread and butter.
That was it.
Yep.
Nice. And is the talk about, so the Grand Ronde versus the Deschutes, are they, for somebody who hasn't fished maybe the Grand Ronde, is it quite a bit different?
Well, it's different in that it's much more defined. It's a lot smaller, a lot less CFS. I mean, during steelhead season on the Grand Ronde, it's running, these days 5 to 700 CFS. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a lot smaller, and it's, head, body, tail, head, body, tail, head, body, tail. Small. You can cast across the river. You still got to bomb some line over there, get over in the good water and have it swing well. But yeah, very different character where, shoots
very different
and getting pushing. And yeah. Now, as far as the method goes, it's, during that time of year, floating line and, pure stuff. And if you want to fish, well, the both of them are great for dry flies and surface flies. And the Grand Ronde, I actually think the Grand Ronde is better with a dry fly.
It is.
More. Yeah, for sure. Of course, I fish a little dry on the Deschutes as well. But, in that regard, the methodology is the same.
Yeah, it is. You're there. I mean, we've seen now, the steelhead numbers have been up and down and, all the closures in some of these places. Were you there? I mean, I know you moved out to Utah, but did you experience that? Were you seeing some of those effects as towards later in the years?
Oh, you mean the down years?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I haven't steelheading. I moved to Utah, and I'm still out there a lot. In fact, I still guide on the Grand Ronde.
Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah. So you're still going strong.
Yep. And I have doing since the change in my life and moving out here, I'm going to be doing my 15th year now consecutive back on the Grand Ronde.
Oh, wow. Cool.
For a few overnight floats down there. Yeah. So yes, I've seen it all. Yes, I've gone over there, and this river that I once knew where we, did catch 2 to 10 fish a day, oftentimes going 6 guests for 3 days, all day, 3 guides, 6 guests, and got 1. I've never got a full blank, but I've had 1 fish, 6 guests for sure. I've seen it. I also, at the end for me on the Skagit, I remember one year in the early 2000s guiding and went 24 days without a fish. So I have most definitely seen it. Mm-hmm. And now things have been, like you said, have been up and down, and the last few years have been a lot better.
Yeah, that's what we've heard. I mean, I know talking to Brian Niska, he was mentioning that I think this year was is looking like a big year. I know, Trevor Kovich up on the OP has talked about how that gets a lot of negative, but he says fishing's, pretty good out there.
Yep.
So, and obviously he's an expert guide. And so you guys are going to,
Absolutely.
going to be the ones, if anybody's going to catch him, probably you'll be the ones. But yeah, I feel like, what's your take on it? I always love the optimistic versus pessimistic. As you look at it, none of us can predict the future, but what's your take on everything?
Oh man, I live in rose-colored glasses. I'm an ultimate cheerleader. There's no question. And with that, before I expound upon that, I did get a little down for a minute there a few years ago. When they're closing the Deschutes River, when you're closing the Deschutes River, something's seriously wrong. Yeah, because out of all those rivers, the Deschutes to me was, outside of a couple of places in British Columbia, was in the lower 48, was the most generous river. As far as giving up. Anyway, yeah, no, I am very optimistic. And in fact, in the way things have been the last couple of years, I've been really excited because I have been through it all, been the one saying, maybe things are cyclic. Yes, I know there's tons of problems. I know that there's climate change. I know that there's dams. I know that there's netting. I know that there's all the stuff coming at the steelhead and salmon and everything else, water temp, all of it. I also know that nature is oftentimes cyclic. And I was always in the back of my head hoping that maybe this is just a cycle and numbers are down and they'll come back up. And is that what's happening? I don't know. But I do know that things are a little better than they were for a while. So, yeah, no, you have to be optimistic. And you have to fight and you have to advocate and you have to lobby and you have to do all those things. But in the meantime, I'm going to be out there swinging my fly for them and believing I'm going to hook one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the cool thing about the swinging the flies, because I think the Spey brings a whole new thing for some people if they're new to it, right? It's a new technique. And do you do more like casting instruction or more guiding fishing on the Spey stuff and steelhead?
So I do two things. The actual fishing stuff I do is those few trips I do on the Grand Ron in the fall. But throughout the year, and I have ever since I moved to Utah, I do travel around and do one-day classes, all casting, and then how it relates to fishing. And then I give a fishing clinic as well. And they're usually like from 9 to 3, 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, and really fun. Just we go to a spot on the river. I have 6 students, and we do all kinds of cool casting stuff. And world according to me, what's important after almost 40 years of doing this or whatever it is. What I really know now is important in the cast. The things we really need to zero in and work on. And I do those. Oh, I don't know. I do big handful of those. Like for instance, this year, and when I do them, I try to go to a sponsor shop and we do at least 2 days to make it worth coming out there, and sometimes 3 if the interest is up. But for instance, this year I've been to Seattle area twice, been to Portland once. I've been to California, Northern California. I was going to be going to New Jersey, but that kind of fell through. I do them out in Nashville, all over, about once a month if I can, and then and that's all the casting stuff. So yeah.
Are you doing a little bit of? Are you into like the smaller stuff, like the trout Spey, and are people interested in that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, sometimes I offer that depending upon the location, and just because there's interest in that, I've been offering trout Spey classes, and just between you and me, and obviously everybody that's listening, it's the same class, right? Just with a smaller rod, because two-handed casting is Spey style casting is what it is, and with the trout thing, there's a few different little techniques that you might not in the fishing part that you might not use with steelheading. Where I'm just like I like to just swing clean with steelhead, but with trout, there's a few other little manipulating things you can do to present the fly. But the casting's all the same.
That's the same. Yeah, nice. We mentioned this at the start, just kind of your books. Maybe talk about that a little bit, because I think we talked, The Passion for Steelhead is one big book I think a lot of people know of, but you've had some other stuff. And on the last episode we did, there was some controversy around the publisher and things like that. But talk about your books just so we understand. I know, maybe talk about if anybody can get them and what you did.
Yeah. So the very, very first book type project I did, and I was super proud of it at the time, it was back in 1996, and I was a wee whippersnapper trying to make a go at all this. And I did, the Amatos were doing those Steelhead river journals. Yeah. And I was asked to do one on the Skagit, and I did. And, that you can find that places. It's just kind of a fun, nostalgic book. And then I did in 2006, A Passion for Steelhead came out. And, and that's a whole another big story on how and why and how all that happened. And I'm proud to say that, that book has helped a lot of people, and it's a certain generation. I was just up on the Skagit this last April, and people were coming to me to sign the book. And specific to that time, I've heard this many times, very humbling, but these young people saying that this is their Bible. This is what I learned from, and thank you so much. And I get tons of emails and instant messages and private messages and stuff with people thanking me for that. And so that's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And then that's since gone out of print, wildly successful in terms of numbers. And I think once I heard Tom Perrow, the publisher, Wild River Press, April Vokey was interviewing him and about his business, his publishing business. And she asked him straight up, what's your most successful book in all your lineup and your library? And he said it was A Passion for Steelhead. And I didn't really know that at the time. I kind of thought it might be. So that's a great feeling. And then after that, we did, so that's out of print. People find them on eBay sometimes. They're usually pretty expensive. And then me and Marty Howard did the fly tying book, which was the main subject of our last, was the fly tying book. And getting past all the problems that occurred and arose, Marty and I went on to self-publish that book, and it's spectacular. And we printed, X amount, whatever it was, 2,500 or 3,000 of them. And they all sold out pretty fast. And it's another book just super proud of, and sold out. And then we haven't printed more because COVID came along, and where we were having it printed and our broker and everything kind of went the wayside after COVID, and to pursue it and print anymore was kind of just, the numbers just didn't really work. And we might revisit it because I know there's still a lot of people that want that book. Yeah. So another Deck Hogan lengthy answer to probably.
No, it's good. I think this is great. And so on the Passion for Steelhead, on that book, what do you think it is that made it? And it is, I think it's the book that's most known in Steelhead that's out there. What do you? Why did it resonate? I think I asked you on the last episode, but why did that book resonate so much with so many people and still is?
Well, first of all, back then the timing of it, but it's first of all, I can humbly say that some of it, I'll just say it. I think it was my voice in it. I'm just friendly, and when I wrote it, I wanted to look at it like you're in my boat for the day or for a couple of days, and I'm just going to teach you about steelhead fishing the way I would, and talk about it the way I would naturally. So that, I think, has some appeal. But the biggest appeal, and all the other steelhead books that were out there, and of course Trey Combs, there's a whole generation that's the Bible, and Trey's writing is fantastic. But if you really look at it, Trey's books are a lot of history. And I think mine was really the first book that really dove into technical how to, where to, when to, how to do it. Seriously, how to do it from start to finish. Where the other books, Trey's and others, kind of just dabbled in it. And if you read between the lines, you obviously learn a bunch, but mine had, the chapter on tackle, the chapter on casting, the chapter on swinging the fly, the chapter on how they take. And that question and answer section filled the gaps on things that I may have missed, and just let people open it up. So I know that, I think that's kind of it.
Yeah, that's it. When you're out on a guide trip and you have maybe a newer person, what are you telling them to get ready? Do you have a few kind of tips or keys that you're getting them set up with the mindset, or what do you tell somebody on steelhead, or maybe it's something you talked about in your book?
Yeah, you have to, first of all, most people that are going to book a trip or get into steelhead, swinging the steelhead, swinging for steelhead, they kind of, 90% of them come into it with a little bit of knowledge base on, yes, I'm getting into something difficult. I'm going I'm going archery, elk hunting.
Musky fishing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Fish of 10,000 casts, right? And we're only dealing with fish of 1,000 casts.
Right.
I just brought that up, but I used to joke back then with some of those days that it was really good. The fishing, I go, fish of 1,000 casts, fish of 10 casts.
Yeah.
Yep. I remember those days. So my thing with them was, when I felt it was needed, because, occasionally I would get somebody who didn't really understand that. And I just, okay, you know what you're getting into, right? We're looking for one fish. And if you hook that fish, it's going to be mind boggling. It's going to be wonderful. And you're going to ride that bull and you're looking for that for one fish a day. And like, okay, great, one. I go, okay, getting one fish, it's really easy to get no fish. If you're looking for one, right? The difference between one fish day and a no fish day is one cast.
Right.
Yeah, out of so many. So I just kind of gear them up and then, certainly talk about the joy of the method and the joy of standing in the river and taking, when you make that cast and you swing, you're not fishing a specific lane. You're fishing the chunk of water. You're grabbing big handfuls of that river and plying through it. And there's some, there's a joy in every aspect of fishing in whatever method you use. But for me, standing in that water and hucking that line out and just grabbing a big piece of water,
Right.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, dissecting it. Like when you go to that, I mean, that's one of the things with steelhead. Do you, somebody's new to it or you're doing it for first time on the water, that's the challenge, right? Where do you fish? Is it one of those things where you just have to put your time in and cover the water and get some touches? Or, how would you tell somebody to explore a new chunk of water when they're swinging for steelhead, never hooked one?
So here's the beauty of the method. The method works. Yes. Yeah. Over time, you start to understand the water and why areas within the run, why would they be there versus over here? But if you have a starting point from A to B, which many, every piece of water we fish does have A to B. If you step in and you don't know anything except how to cast at a 50 to 60 degree angle across, put one mend in and hang on and let it swing across as slow as you can and take your 2 steps and keep doing that, the method works. You're going to eventually run into something if it's out there, right? So that's just bare bones, right? Bare bones minimum. The method works. Then after that, you the astute angler or someone who's very observant will start to notice where his fly is swinging slower, where it's going fast, and you can't control that speed. And then you take 3 steps down, and then all of a sudden it's swimming slowly all by itself. Well, that's probably where the fish are going to be, And fortunately, I know for myself, I did have a lot of feedback in those days because if you're not hooking fish, it's really hard to understand. And that is something I tell my guests is there's 2 things that are going to tell you you're doing it right. One is me, and the other steelhead, right? You don't hook them by mistake. But if you're not hooking them and I'm by your side and teaching you about the water and the way your fly swing, oh yeah, Dave, man, you're swinging that perfect. I couldn't do it any better myself. Sorry, no fish. But if there was one, you did it.
Yeah.
You're doing it right. Yep.
Yep, that's it. Do you know the runs, like say on the Grand Ron, are the same runs where you've hooked fish, say 20 years ago? Are those runs, those spots, those little buckets in there still the same, or does that change quite a bit?
There are some places, those rivers certainly move around but they also, a lot of those basalt type rivers anchored in those canyons, they don't change a whole lot like the floodplain rivers of the west side.
Yeah.
That do change,
Like who are those? Those would be the rivers up there you fish. Those change a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Some of the lay of the land is similar, but I've had experiences where whole 5-mile stretches of river jump through channel.
Right.
And all these runs you used to know are high and dry.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Forming, yeah. But with my knowledge of the Deschutes and the Deschutes is definitely today. I can go to some of the same absolute buckets that I hooked fish on 30 years ago, and they're exactly the same. Yeah. And the Ron has some of that too, for sure. The Ron moves around a little more, but yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. And you mentioned on the slow, so that's something that's interesting because you have all these different currents. If you're cast out, you're swinging your fly, and you hit some of these areas that maybe are the slower, or there's a weird current, do you let that just swing through and then maybe it's doing some weird stuff, or do you try to get set up before you hit that spot? How do you do it? Because sometimes the current kind of takes your fly kind of in a weird direction, right?
Yeah, it does. And when it does take it in the weird direction, that's just what the current's doing. Here, check this out. So you're in a piece of water, and well, first of all, let me back up. When my fly is underway and it's swinging, yeah, I don't do much to it at all. I don't want to move it. I let the current, when we're fishing fly water and all these name brand fly rivers, they all have one thing in common, and that's good fly water, good swing water, I should say. That 6 feet deep and fairly broad, even flow. And that's all relative too. They're not all big, 30-foot long swings, but there might be sections within there where you get a good 5-foot swing. And then it opens up to a 10-foot swing and narrows down to a 3-foot swing and opens up to a 30-foot swing within the run. When I say swing, the good parts. So I let my fly, I try to bring it as slow as possible. And when it hits a little rough patch, I just let it go because it's eventually going to reach a good patch. If you try and so getting back to what I was going to say is that if you're in a piece of water, and I'm asking you, Dave,
yeah,
you're in a piece of water and you're swinging that fly and the current keeps pushing on it. So you mend upstream.
Yep.
I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to tell you 9 times what happens that it goes right back in and you got to mend again. The current pushes it right.
It does.
Right?
Yeah. You got to keep mending. Yeah. Keep mending.
What happens? It goes right back in.
Yep.
Sure. So what I do rather than fight that and go, oh, wow, every time I do that, what am I really trying to accomplish? Is first of all, is there going to be a fish right there? I doubt it. So what I do when I keep getting where if I mend, it wants to go push it right back in, that's where I just exploit what the current's doing and I'll actually slowly lead it. I use that.
Oh, lead it. Yeah.
Slowly lead it, not to make it go faster, but just to kind of keep it going as straight as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you lead it with like your rod tip downstream a little bit?
Absolutely. Rather than fight it, I go with it. Absolutely. And there's some, generally the faster the current, the more you want to get that rod tip up behind the fly, the slower the current, you stay with it or stay slightly ahead of it. But in those instances where it's really pushing on it, and you're in good water.
That's it. Are you ever talk about slowing the fly, but are there ever times where you're actually trying to speed up the fly in certain situations?
Yeah. The only time that I truly try and speed it up is if I've missed a fish or it's missed me, I should say, and we're playing that game, we found a player and we're playing that game. And I know it's one that's worth staying. Remember the little hatchery buck we talked about?
Yeah.
Let's move on. Sometimes they're definitely worth staying and playing with. After my little fly change or whatever I'm doing in that scenario, I'll sometimes if I don't get him back, I'll put a lot of speed on the fly and rip it through there.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works. They come chasing it out. Now, for all the listeners out there who might be in my boat someday,
yeah.
If you hook a fish on a sped up fly, that doesn't mean you just go, wow, they want it fast today.
Right.
And then you go to the next run and you don't do that. You go back to always fish slow. Yeah. Yeah.
Step into the world where the river whispers and the fishing is nothing short of legendary. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. Yellowstone Teton territory is not just a location, it's a gateway to adventures that will etch themselves into your memory. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake, and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. Whether you're planning your trip now or just dreaming it up, the YTT is where those dreams turn into reality. Remember, Yellowstone Teton territory. That's Teton, Teton. It's time to experience Eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. And you mentioned the fly change, so you get that player that's messing with it. If you do switch up, what are you switching up? What are you starting with typically, or what's your switch up?
Yeah, standard stuff. I get this question a lot. How do you? And I wrote about it in A Passion For Steelhead. What do you do? And yeah, you have you kind of have your lineup and the way you play it, but each scenario is a little different if you really think about it. Where in the run did it happen? How did it react? But let's just say in general, if one comes up and gets pulls on it and for sure it's a steelhead, the first thing I do is not pull back on it and I let it keep swinging through. Right? You don't just let it keep swinging. And sometimes you take care of it right there. You get that pull, you let it keep swinging. The fish didn't know it was tethered.
No.
Fish didn't know the fly's tethered. He comes up and hails on it and turns and it's supposed to go in, right? So I watch them. They'll circle back around and smack it again. So that's always the best case scenario. And we've all had that. Anyone who's spent time, you feel a big pull, keep swinging, schwack.
Yeah.
You get it.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. There's some of those ones where you get one where There's all sorts of, but yeah, the one where it's hitting you multiple times on the same swing, which is crazy, right?
Yeah, they're following it and whacking at it and stuff. Yeah, but that one where you get a good pull in the heart of the swing, and then 5-6 feet later, bang.
Yeah.
It's almost always the same. They come up, they turn, they go down, nothing came with it, go out again and do a whole nother turn on it and pull on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that what they're doing? So when it's swinging down and they're multiple bumping, hitting it, what are they doing? What's the fish actually doing down in the water? It's just, is it just kind of playing with it?
Yeah, they're coming up, coming down, coming up, coming down. I've watched look like Daffy Duck. They go backwards, forwards, and smack it, and sometimes it's just their body swirling. When they're doing that, it's goofy. Or remember the little hatchery buck that we talked about nipping at it? He's staying right behind it.
Oh, right.
And with it, go nip, nip, nip,
Oh,
nip.
right.
Yep. And you think about that. If he wanted it, he would just take it.
Yeah,
I think that's what he's doing. He's just nipping at it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what that fish did. He nipped at it the first time I put the same cast, and he just kind of did the same thing, and I just didn't do anything, and he just kept slowly pulling it away, and eventually it was on. I did nothing.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, good. Well, that's good for you, because that's what you should do. Just let it keep swinging, and eventually that fish wanted it enough, and he took it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Very cool.
There's the we always used to joke like the tap, the tug, all these names for different types. Have you thought about or talked about that? Like, does it really matter what it is? The pull, the grab. I mean, is it all pretty much the same thing, or do you have to really know what they're doing down there?
It's a fish moving to your fly, which is always a good thing, right? As Bill McMillan said, you've created the art. The art has happened. The fish moved to the fly. Whether it fully took it or not, the fish moved to the fly. It reacted to your fly, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it matters in the sense of remember earlier, just a minute ago, I talked about where in the run and how they took it determines how excited I am about if we're going to get that fish back or not, or if it's even worthy of really pursuing. So, a little tiny tug. And again, I have seen all this stuff. I know what a tug looks like. I know what a tap looks like. I know what a full take. I know what it looks like when you, as the angler, have no idea that a fish just aggressively came to your fly and turned away. Right?
Didn't even touch it. You didn't even see it.
Yeah, didn't even touch it. And you just take your 2 steps and go, oh, no fish today.
And why do you think they're doing it? Is that just all different situations? Maybe they didn't like the fly. Why are they turning away?
Yeah, I don't know. Yep. I just
didn't do it.
Just didn't make the commitment, didn't like something. But the interesting thing is, you can say that they didn't like it or whatever, something spooked them. But a lot of times when I watch a fish that comes quickly to it and turns on it and doesn't, it looks like rejection. A lot of times you can get that back. If they make an aggressive move, and sometimes it's just even that fly speed. All of a sudden, what attracted them, the fly speed may have changed and they just kind of spooked them away. I don't really know that. I just know that when they make that aggressive move, a lot of times you can get them back. And I get those guys back 9 times out of 10 by just trying to even slow the fly further.
Even more.
And you know what my number one thing to have when I'm guiding, and even myself, but let's just talk in guiding, when I'm somebody else's my rod that I'm manipulating, I just tell them to take 1 step out. Don't do anything different. Just take 1 step out. And that goes back to the very first thing we said when we started this talk, was that the closer that rod tip is to the fly, the slower you go. So without changing anything and just taking 1 step out, which could be, 10 to 20, 30 inches, just that alone is going to slow that fly over that fish.
That's huge.
Yep. And that oftentimes works. Yep.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's the sort of tip that, I think not everybody thinks about, that. Yeah. You don't have to stay in that same run or that same exact place you've always done. And that kind of gets back to it. So that's a great tip, the 1 step out. When you're fishing a run, really well, maybe you've got these 5-6 buckets within a giant, maybe 100-yard run or longer. Are you really focusing on those little buckets and then skipping the rest? Or are you still covering, everything as you go?
Okay. That's a great question. For my personal fishing, I definitely pick up my pace between the good spots. I don't overfish it, because you just never know. But you also, I believe that fish sees that fly long before it gets to it. And that fish, predators rely on predictability. And when they see some consistency on what that fly is doing coming at them, I feel like it's important. But yes, I definitely speed up and slow down through a run. Now, I would never tell anybody new to it to do that, because they don't know, they just don't have the experience yet to know when and where, because they could mess it up. So it's best just to stick to that two-step, a good yard between casts, cadence, and work down the run. But yeah, for sure, you speed up, slow down.
Speed up. When you're fishing some of these, maybe the Grand Ron's a good example, or some of these other ones, and you get that tip or tap, and then the fish hooks up. How many times is that fish not a steelhead, maybe a trout or something else?
Oh, on certain rivers, it's, on the Grand Ronde, depending upon what stretch you're in, there's a couple stretches in that river at certain times of year where it's 80, 90%, juvenile steelhead.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Wrapping on you. Yeah.
Yep.
And then there's sections. And then, of course, there's some smallmouth bass in there. And there's
right,
even
the
those pike minnow. I've
Yep.
caught some mondo pike minnow. There's bull trout.
Right.
And all the above. But you know what? When you're fishing, when you're swinging, barring you're not in those stretches that have the juveniles in mass, pretty much if you have something pulling on you, 90% of the time it's a
if you're in a steelhead run. If you're in a steelhead run, that's likely a steelhead.
Absolutely. And on the Deschutes, you occasionally get a red side or a whitefish or something that grabs it. But I've had many. I've literally, when I used to guide there, every day, 7 days a week for the entire season, which August to November, I would have a guy. He's on day 3 with me. He's hooked 3 or 4 steelhead already, so things are good. And he'll go, "Oh, I think that was a trout." And I say, "Bob, you've been here for 3.5 days. How many trout have you hooked?" None. How many steelhead have you hooked? 4. Okay. You really think that's a trout all of a sudden?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm not saying it can't be, but most of the time when you're swinging for steelhead, you're getting steelhead.
You get steelhead. That's awesome. You mentioned a few people like the Deschutes, Hazel, and a lot of these people. I mean, when you look back, I guess maybe back earlier, did you have some people that were really, was it the Harry Lemire's? Like, who were your biggest influences, when you first got going? And because I know you've.
When I first got going, I read feverishly, old stuff back from the 50s, Claude Kreider, Clark Van Fleet, all those guys. But on the water, I was influenced and watched Harry Lemire a lot. I talked to him occasionally and listened to what he had to say. And in 1990, me and Scott O'Donnell invited him fishing, thinking that he would never come. And, we were 20, something snot-nosed kids new on the block. And sure enough, he came with us.
He did. What was that like? What was that like fishing with Harry?
Down a day to go fishing. So,
right.
Yeah. So that day, it was one day in the life of an angler. And I can still tell you all the wisdom he imparted on us. And it wasn't like, he was this, instructor taking us under his wing. He was out fishing and we just listened to what he had to say. And when he would do something, occasionally I'd say, "Why'd you do that?" And he would tell you, super cool.
What river do you fish with him?
With him, I took him on the upper section of the Sauk River from Darrington down.
Gotcha.
And he fittingly hooked the only fish that day. Yep.
He did.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, we gave him all the buckets. We were
right. Yeah. No. Was he fishing a single or a spey?
No, he was fishing a 2-hander that day. Yeah. And I was too. Yeah. And Scott still had a single hander. And I got my first 2-hander. My first 2-hander was actually given to me that year. It was 1990. It was the first 9140-4, one of the first six prototypes of it. And he had one as well. So Harry Lemire had a huge influence on me. And and again, I feel so fortunate because it wasn't about his influence on me wasn't reading about him in a book. It was being with him, right? And talking to him on a regular basis. And then Bill McMillan was super important to me. I read all his stuff. And then in 1991 on the Grand Ronde, he came out and he was hired to come out and give, I don't know, he did 2 or 3 of them, his fishing clinic, casting. And we would go in the morning. First, I'd take my guys out. We'd fish one run. Then we'd meet Bill. and we do Bill's clinic till noon or something, and then in the afternoon I would take the guests out and practice what we had learned in Bill's class. And are you kidding me? Did I learn so much about dryline steelheading and steelhead fishing in general, going to his class every day and sleeping in the same bunk room as him and
Right.
having dinner with him. And yeah. In fact, he wound up writing the foreword to Passion for Steelhead.
All right.
Yep. Which a huge honor. So him, and then someone who kind of an unsung hero. Some of you have heard of him, and a lot of it because of me writing about him. And is Charlie Gearhart. Just a really awesome. He just passed away this last year. Sad stuff. But he was another one of my great mentors.
Yep. Wow.
Yeah. And then I learned a lot from John Hazel being by him, and he was, to me, kind of more of a peer, but a wealth of knowledge that I definitely learned from. Yep.
Yep. Nice. Well, let's start to take it out of here. This is our trip, bucket list segment here. And today it's presented by Skwala Fly Fishing. They've got some amazing gear. They're kind of I think a lot of people have used lots of waders and gear over the years. Skwala is kind of one of those newer brands, but they have some really high quality stuff. I want to start off, giving a shout out to Skwala first, but then talking about trips, because we're heading up to Alaska. We're going to do hopefully 2 trips next year, and we're doing one is going to be like a road trip on the road system. But you've done a lot of Alaska, so let's start it there. Well, first, I want to take it back to this crazy thing. First of all, we don't have to go deep, but this story where you got your truck stolen.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a crazy story. What can you remind folks how that ended? Because was there anything good that came of that?
No.
No, that was just a terrible thing that you literally got your truck and trailer.
It was not just my truck. It was a U-Haul.
Oh, it was a U-Haul.
Of all of it was my brand new truck. The first vehicle that I had bought in my life that wasn't just a tool. It was something I really wanted, and I bought it brand new.
God.
And we had it for 3 weeks, and it got stolen. It had a U-Haul full of our adventure gear, meaning our mountain bikes, fishing gear, camping gear, years and years of slowly chipping away at purchasing these things. So, no, I don't know that anything good came of that. I'd like to say yes. Well, you know what did come good of it? I'm a lot more cautious and aware of my needs now, and I'm going with my gut. If my gut tells me something, I go with it. I never guess it ever. Yeah,
that's a great point. I had my car stolen when I was in high school. First time, drove up. It was this crazy story. I was getting insurance at the time. Was out for 5 minutes. Car stolen. But since that day, I've locked my car doors every time, no matter where I am. Right? It's so. I think that's probably been a positive for me.
Yep.
Gosh. So, okay. So you got that, but talk about Alaska. So we're not going to go deep in this, but you had a lot of experience. Where were you fishing in Alaska? Where did you kind of get started? And did you fish all over Alaska or certain areas?
No, I guided on a specific river. It was the Alagnak River. And then there we fished the main river, which the Alagnak, has all 5 species of salmon, trout, grayling, dolly barred, and all of it, and pike, and just wonderful. And then we would also fly out. So, I'd fish up some of those little creeks up on the Kukoklik and Nonbinic, Battle Creek, Little Kukoklik, Funnel, those places. And a couple other American River, Katmai, all that. And then since I've been back several times as a host to the Connect Talk, I've been to the Aniak system up near Bethel and down on the Kenai. I've been down there. That's about it. Yeah, it's a huge state.
So and so you fish for kind of everything, Chinook and done.
Yep. I had like a lot of experience in all 5 species of salmon and everything that swims up there. I've even caught sheefish.
Oh wow. Where are the sheefish? Where can you find those?
The sheefish was when I went up to the Aniak in Bethel. We flew up to the Anoco, which I believe is a huge, big slough kind of tributary to the Yukon.
Yeah.
Yukon River. Yep. And we caught pike and sheefish. Yeah.
And sheefish. Nice. Well, let's talk about just a couple tips. We talked steelhead, we talked spey a little bit, but I want to focus on steelhead here. What, again, you got somebody maybe you're guiding or you're talking to. What are a few of those steelhead tips you're telling them before, to have a little more success on the water?
Tips?
Yeah. Like what are you setting somebody up for? Is it pretty standard on what you're doing?
Pretty standard. Yeah. We talked about, how to swing the fly and how to move through the run, and just always the biggest tip is really not the biggest tip, but one of the biggest tips is you have to go to the fish. We go to the fish. The fish don't come to us. You have to keep moving. You can't, I used to say, Bob, you get a fish on this run and this cast and the trip's on me. And Bob goes, why? Why? That's going out there. Why? And because you've made 4 casts in the same spot.
Yeah. Right.
You're not going to get one there.
No.
We have to go to them. Keep moving.
Yeah.
Yep.
Keep moving. Okay. And what's I know fly isn't super critical, but if you had to put on a fly right now on whatever river for summer steelhead, what fly are you putting on?
All right, here we go. No. So so many things will work, but if you just a deck, you got to have one fly to fish all your summer steelhead, given dry line situation in lower 48 or even in BC, I would use like a size 4 muddler.
A muddler. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If
go.
I had to have one fly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Purple or color matter?
Natural muddler.
Just natural. Yeah.
Yep. And then in the wintertime, it would be, if I had to have just one, it wouldn't be an intruder, just be a big purple marabou.
Purple marabou. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And what's your set, like for rods, like if you're fishing steelhead, what's your typical, if we're talking summer steelhead again, what like weight, length and all that stuff?
So if the 30-06 of fly rods, 2-handers for me is a 13-foot 7 weight ish.
Yeah.
You can kind of do it all with that. You can do winter steelhead. You can do summer steelhead. It's, and every now and then it's not quite big enough for the winter stuff or whatever you're doing. And then sometimes it's a little too big for the summer stuff, but what's too big and what's too small, it's really about what you're casting and what lines and fly size you're handling, not so much the size of the fish, but the gear, the tackle that you're using. And a 7-weight will pretty much handle everything on both sides of the spectrum. Yeah. So Deschutes, for me personally, Deschutes, Grand Ron type stuff, John Day. I like a 13-foot 6-weight, 12.5-foot 6-weight. Yep. And then, I fished the Babine this last bucket list trip this last October. And you think of those big, huge fish and all that. Most of the guys up there, it was a veteran crew. They were fishing 13-foot 7 weights, 8 weights. And I used on that particular trip, the rod I used the most was that 13-4 Berkheimer, which is really a 7-weight. Yep. And it was fine.
Okay. And then what about your line? I know there's tons of great lines out there. What's your type of line, or is this maybe brand?
So for general searching on most of these rivers, if I'm using a floating line, and I love casting mid bellies and long bellies. I'm in love with Tim Arsenault's bridge lines and that tributary line particularly, and it's wonderful. It's a little longer than most, but the Scandies. But I've just, for day in and day out, I'm using the Scandi line for floating on the Deschutes and the Grand Ronde Scandi line. And then for my sinking tip work, I do use a Skagit because it's the best tool, because mass moves mass. And if I'm using a heavy, sink tip and a big fly, that Skagit line's where it's at. So Skagit, Scandi, and then I definitely do mid and long bellies for certain. I'm going to be fishing the Clearwater this fall for a couple of days with my wife, and I'll be using either the tributary bridge or the main stem bridge, which is really long.
Okay. And on that Skagit line, how bad would it be if you use that Skagit line on the Deschutes or Grand Ronde with a dry?
It works fine. You have to put a floating tip, you need a floating tip on there. You can't just put a leader on the end of your Skagit line, which I see people do, which you have to have something on there. But yeah, if you can have a floating tip and it, it's not as aesthetically clean and beautiful and as a Scandi line and how it turns over and gentle and, easy presentation. But yeah, it worked just fine.
Yeah, it worked fine. And I think we maybe talked a little bit about this, but just on your transition to space. So you were at one point single-handed. Was that transition to you? Describe that a little bit. What was it easy? I know it wasn't easy, but what was it like? Did it take you a while to kind of master this thing?
You mean the two-handed casting?
Yeah.
Itself?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. You got to also have to consider that when I started doing it, there was no books, there was no video, there was nobody. Essentially, there was a very, very small handful of people doing it, and they're figuring it out because it was so new.
Right. Well, and were you there? I mean, I just described it a little because you talked about Ed, and we're hoping to have Ed on the podcast, soon as well. But I mean, you were there, right? With all the, like, before OPST and all that stuff.
Gosh, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No. So if you want to know what we did, so
yeah, with
our single-handed rods, the typical lineup on the S River land. Skagit, Skycomb stock, with your fishing tips, we typically made our own sink tips. And you would take, like, for instance, even back then, that teeny 200 line around, you would take a teeny 200, you would cut the head off, the sink, you would, right where the running line met the sinking portion, you'd cut that off, and then we'd splice in like a 10-foot section of 8 or 9 or even 10 weight floating section. You'd splice that in, and then cut the floating portion back down to, a lot of guys did 15 feet. Some guys did 18 feet. So let's just say I did 15 feet, and I would have 15 feet of sinking line. And behind that would be a floating belly section that I spliced in a running line, right? And you just wheeled that thing around, and you could false cast, just load it off the water and launch it. So it shot really well. And then that 10-foot section of belly in there, you can manipulate it, right, and do a little mending. If you just did a straight teeny 200 out of a box, or the old shooting heads from Northern California, where they just take a running line, 30-foot head, no belly section, your fly swung at the mercy of the angle that you cast it. Because once it was on the water, there was nothing you could do with it. So we had that belly section. But if you think about it, and again, I'm asking you, Dave, you got a running line, you got a belly section, and you got a sink tip, a short belly section and sink tip. What in effect do we have?
What effect do we have?
What in effect did we just?
You created the modern, essentially the modern, I guess Skagit line.
Skagit line, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're fishing Skagit lines, quote unquote, whatever you want, with our single-handed rods, but it was just our line. So when we transitioned to the two-handed rod, trying to figure out what to put on this thing. Yeah, when I say there was nothing to read about, it was old.
Right.
English.
So what you're saying is that what you just described there, you were doing that on a single hand rod.
On the single hander. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So when we got the two handers, it's what we knew. It's what we've, from a fishing tool, it was perfect. It's what we'd used. So what we did with the two hander when we got them was we just made a great big one of those.
Yeah.
Made our own Skagit line, and we just sized it for the
just made it longer to fit the rod.
14-foot 9 weight. Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't call it a Skagit line. It was just our line.
Yeah, it was just your line. And were you thinking about I guess that was all the work. How long did it take to, you hear now like the 2.5 or 3-to-1 on the, the rod length versus the line length sort of thing?
That happened real quick.
That was quick. You guys figured that out real quick?
Yeah, that was real quick. That was that was right in that first year. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wait, what was the number back then that you guys came to?
Pretty much 2.5. Yep. 2.5. Yep. Some guys like a little shorter. Some guys like a little longer. Yep.
Yep. That's it.
Yep. And then even some guys just did almost just the rod length. I remember Harry just used, his head was on belly section was only like 17 feet.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But super heavy. It was like 12 weight belly section on a 9 weight rod. Yeah. So there was varying degrees, but yeah, that 2.5 came pretty quick.
And were the line or the casts, and back then when you were kind of figuring this out, what were the casts you guys were doing? Were you doing all sorts of different casts?
No. Because there was, first of all, for us back then, there was 2 casts, and that was a single spey and a double spey. And the single spey, as you know, is aerialized. You form your D loop and your anchor in the aerialized, and you set it, touch it down, and go. So nobody liked that with those heavy tips, and it was hard to really learn how to do it. So we did double spey, and we did off shoulder double spey. And then if we were in a situation where you're on river right with an upstream breeze, and all we knew was a double spey, right?
Yeah.
We would throw the line upstream and do a double spey off our off shoulder to get it out there. And it was a cluster. It was nasty. And fortunately, enter the snap T.
Yeah, the snap T.
Yep, the snap T we started doing 92, 93.
Where did the snap T? Was that just you guys coming together on that, or where did that start? What was the first snap T?
So the first snap T in my world, there's like anything as time goes on, you have guys going, we were doing that in 47 years ago,
right.
Oh, were you really? Okay, well, good. Maybe you were.
Right.
But all I know is that in my little area up there, we didn't know it, and we discovered it. And the quick story, if we have time to hear
it. Let's hear it.
And this is true, and nobody can argue this. I was working at a Sage booth at a sports show in Tacoma. Some people think it was the Kingdome when they hear the story. It was at Tacoma Dome. And John Farrar, guide back then, dean among guides at the time on the Skagit, me, him, and George Cook, who needs no introduction.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
He was a young Sage rep, and I was the young guide, and George got me to work the booth, and John Farrar, and they just each traded out gear while we were in there, and it was a fun time. And Tom White, who at the time was a Loomis rep, he was out there doing his dog and pony show in front of at the casting pond, and Tom was a great guy, but he had this kind of fast, smooth talking car salesman kind of thing going on, and he'd pull a gal out of the crowd and say, stick your arm out. He's giving her a little lesson in front of everybody. And he's going to stick your arm out and we're going to check our fly. And he'd have 80 feet of fly line out and he'd lift, and then shoot underneath it, right? Shoot underneath the line and it would cast that line back at you, right?
Yep.
And essentially he was doing a snap tee. And he would line it up perfect with that rod tip. The line and the fly followed the path of the rod tip. So it was easy. You just kept that rod tip over her arm through the whole movement and the fly would come back and land right on her, draping over her arm, and everyone would go, ooh, ah, ooh. And, it's the show was 3 or 4 days and we watched him do that twice a day. And it was fun to watch. And then I distinctly remember on the last day, John came up to me and he kind of leaned into me and all the half out of the side of his mouth and said, I've been watching that thing Tom's been doing. We might be able to use that with our two-handed cast somehow. And I said, huh? Yeah, and this is 90 or 91, 92, early. We're still all just learning. And John said, if you figure something out, let me know. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't think about it much after that. And then one day I'm out guiding somebody and who actually owned a fly shop in Lidwin, Washington, Nick Gajewski. And he said, hey, I was guiding him. And he said, do you see the thing Farrar's doing? And I said, what? And he raised the rod. We're on river left, and he raised the rod real high, and he did this really violent movement downstream, and he kind of screwed it up. And I'm like, where are you going with this? And he was really spastic with it. And then he hit one, and it shot the fly upstream. It landed above him, and then the line landed a little bit downstream of him, and he made a D-loop. And I went, oh, my gosh, I see it. I know what's going on here. And I said, give me that rod. I let him do it once. I saw it. I said, give me that rod. And I messed around with it, and all of a sudden I'm doing snap tees. And I was nailing it. It was just me. Talk about the clouds part and the angels singing.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, we don't have to mess around with that god-awful single spay anymore.
Yep.
So then it just moves on from there, and if you've ever seen a George Cook seminar or clinic or whatever, I don't know if he does it anymore, but for years, here's how he would introduce the snap tee. He would say, John Farrar invented it, Deck Hogan perfected it, and I named it.
He did.
Yeah. So, and as far as John inventing it, story noted, me perfecting it was because when we first started doing it, even with John, it was this violent, right out in front of you. You raise the rod, snap it down really hard, fall where it may. And guys were shearing rod tips off and stuff. And I was by myself one day going, you know what? It's casting. It should be smooth. It should be effortless. So I figured out if you really raise that rod up and really get the line of the fly moving and break a lot of surface tension, then you can smoothly make the snap nice and easy, like a cast, smooth, and then follow through. And when you follow through, that rod tip is out of the way of the fly, and everything lands nicely and elliptical on the water, and then everything's smooth. So that's that. Then George named it the snap tee. And I always, even to this day, when I'm teaching, I think, the word snap is not a good casting.
No, yeah,
it's not a good casting word. I used to call it chicks dig it cast, but
right, the snap tee. Yeah, when you hear that. Now the snap tee is just like normal, everybody knows.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, back then snap. You don't want to snap in your fly cast.
No snapping.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. And I always used to joke, snap's a bad word, and I don't know where the T is, but it's George, and I love him, and it's stuck, and it's what it's called now. So yeah. But yeah, that's my snap tee.
I love that. And the snap tee versus the circle C, when would you use one or the other?
All right, good. Another good one. So the circle spay and the C spay, people have their own, since it has been around a long time. I can some people have their own ideas about it, but here's what it is. The snap tee and the circle cast are the same. They're just different loop sizes. When you make a big circle, it makes a big wide loop for the set, right? A snap tee, and it's just a setup, right? Like once it's on the water, you sweep and you make a D loop and you cast. So the snap tee part or the circle part is just the setup. So if you consider that the circle, we did that years ago as instructors, because it's a lot easier to teach you to do a big, giant, wide, backwards reverse C if you're a right-hander, with the acceleration on the back side of the C, and follow through to get used to it and get comfortable with it. And then the better you get at it, the more you can bring it into a smaller C to where it's just this little tiny tight loop. So there it is. On the setup, C Spey gives you a big wide loop, and a snap tee gives you a super tight loop. That's the difference.
That's it. Yeah. And so if you're a beginner, probably the C is a better one to learn on.
Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Cool, Deck. Well, this has been awesome. I'm glad we had time to put all this together and get some of the history and some tips here.
Yeah.
I think anything else? Well, let me just leave one question. This is one I kind of interested in a little bit, but looking back at yourself, I'm not sure your age. I think we're probably close to you might be a little bit older than me, but if you look back on your 25-year-old self, I'm not sure where you were, but what advice would you give to yourself back when you were 25, knowing what you know now?
Oh, man, you know what I would? Okay, I'm 61.
Okay, good.
And what I would tell my 25-year-old self, and this might sound cocky and arrogant, but I'd say, you go, guy. You keep doing what you're doing, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't just go for it.
Yeah, because I was just, for lack of a better term, balls to the wall, man, ate up and just going for it.
Right.
Just going for it and just eating up water and probably fishing the wrong stuff a lot, but I was strong and I was hungry and I'd fish through it. And I would much rather have done it that way than someone just grab my hand and say, no, this is where you fish. So, which I had a little bit of that too, but we mowed it down, man.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yep.
All right, Deck. Well, we'll at Deck Hogan on Instagram if anybody wants to connect with you or maybe check in if you have a room in future classes. But thanks again today for another great episode. We will be in touch. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Fire me up. I talk about this stuff, and now I need to go fishing right now. Right this minute. I'm gone.
That's right. All right, Deck. We'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right, our call to action for you today is to check in with Deck on Instagram if you get a chance. Let him know you heard this podcast and let him know if you know of his past, if he's influenced you, give him a heads up and just say thanks to Deck for all the great work he's done over the years. And if you're interested, check in with him on classes, clinics. He's doing some stuff. He mentioned those today, and find out if he's doing anything in your area. If you get a chance, please follow this show. That's really easy on Apple Podcasts. Click that plus button, and it'll ensure you get that next episode delivered right to your inbox. I want to give a quick shout out to the shop. I ran into Dick with TFO I guess it was last week, and we were chatting about it. I let him know about this, our new community, the shop that we are upgrading here. And this is your chance to come in, hang out at the shop in our community, and build your greatest trip this year. Just send me an email, Dave at wetflyswing.com, and put the shop in the subject line and let me know you're interested in hearing more. This is our paid group that's going to allow you to live that greatest trip. And that might be a trip potentially with someone like Deck Hogan. We've got some new things going. I want to hear from you. So if you want to build these together, come into the shop and let's do this now. Wetfly Swing Pro. One quick shout out before we get out of here on our trips. We've got Schultz Outfitters. We're heading for smallmouth bass. And if you're interested in fishing smallmouth, was one of the best in the country, Schultz Outfitters and team, we're doing it. We've been waiting for this one for a long time, so send me an email. You know where to find me, and put Schultz Outfitters and smallmouth bass in the comments or in the subject line, and I'll follow up with you on availability. We usually have a limited number of spots, and these usually go quick, so definitely get in on this one, and I'll get back to you and let you know what we have going. All right. Hope you enjoyed this one. I definitely loved it, and I look forward to getting that next episode out there. If you haven't talked to me, please send me an email. You know where to find me. I'd love to hear if we haven't talked yet or connected, to hear that you're listening. It's what keeps me going, checking those emails out. So please send me an email or check in on Instagram. All right. Hope you're having a great morning. Hope you have a great afternoon or magnificent evening, wherever in the country you are. Look forward to catching you on that next episode. See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.